It was more about that anxiety before a business review or a board meeting that would keep these marketing leaders up. And it's not like they didn't know what they were doing. It was a foreign language. It was like a massive communication gap between the CMO and everybody else in the C-suite. So that sort of, emotional anxiety is what got us excited about wanting to build a company because we thought that marketers deserve better.
Welcome to Experimental, the podcast that cuts through the noise to bring you actionable insights in B2C growth, marketing, and data science. I'm your host, Sundar, former head of brand data science at Uber and the mind behind the Experimental newsletter. Join me as I talk with industry leaders who have driven growth at companies like Uber, Spotify, and Netflix. We'll uncover the experiments, failures, and breakthroughs that lead to real results. Now, let's get experimental.
Hey, everybody. Today, my guest is Pranav Piyush. He's currently the CEO and founder at Paramark.com, helping CEOs and CFOs make smarter marketing decisions. He's also the course instructor at Reforge for marketing measurement. Before that, he was a marketing leader at companies like Pilot.com, Bill.com, and Dropbox. He's a fantastic marketer, and I love what he's got to say on LinkedIn, and so I'm super excited to have him. Pranav, welcome to Experimental.
Thank you. And I have to say, thanks for the intro. Thanks for having me. I love the title of this podcast. It's awesome. So it's different and I like how you're positioning the whole thing. So super excited.
I actually wanted to get started with is you are now leading what I would call a marketing science, marketing measurement platform. But tell me a little bit about how you got that started.
Yeah, it's a good question. So I'll give you the abridged version and then you tell me if you want me to go deeper on any specific piece. So I'm an engineer by training. I studied computer science in college and very quickly realized that I liked sort of hanging out with people and more than sort of being behind a screen and writing code all day long. And, went down that path of just, understanding business, whether it was building products, whether it was go to market. And I didn't ever think I would become a marketer. Like I didn't know what that even meant. But as I sort of, grew in my career, spent time at companies like Dropbox and, a startup that got bought by Adobe and PayPal and so on and so forth, I took on more and more go-to-market sort of initiatives, growth initiatives, business operations initiatives. And after a few years of doing it, I was like, oh, this is marketing. And, there was a trend of calling it growth and everything but marketing. And I was like, no, this is marketing. And so one day I raised my hand and spoke to my sort of SVP of something at one of the companies. And I told him like, hey, I'd love to run marketing one day. And he was like, all right, great. He remembered that 2 jobs later, he called me for a marketing leadership role at a startup. And that was kind of my official entry into marketing. Now, once I got in there and I started looking at sort of all aspects of marketing, I was like, this is cool, but like, why is it so dysfunctional when it comes to analytics and attribution and measurement? And I started just kind of go deeper into that whole world and also realized that most of my peers, other VPs of marketing and, CMOs were struggling with the exact same thing. So that was the very organic way in which I got into it. And initially, when we started to think about business ideas, me and my co-founder, this was not on the cards. We weren't going out there and saying, oh, we're going to build a marketing measurement company. We actually had a different idea and we just started spending time with CMOs talking about their struggles. This is back in late 2022, early 2023. We're just trying to figure out, hey, what are you struggling with? What's your day-to-day like? Like, tell us about sort of, what's keeping you up at night. And every single one talked about how it's really hard to talk to my finance leaders and my CEO about what's working and what's not working. And we would stay away from the word attribution, but it was more about that anxiety before a business review or a board meeting that would keep these marketing leaders up. And it's not like they didn't know what they were doing. It was a foreign language. It was like a massive communication gap between the CMO and everybody else in the C-suite. So that sort of, emotional anxiety is what got us excited about wanting to build a company because we thought that marketers deserve better. So that's the story. That's how we got into it. And it's been great, right? We've had the opportunity to serve lots of marketing leaders over the last 3 years. I can say they are amazing human beings and there's a lot of latent potential in the marketing function that we are excited about sort of unleashing and really sort of helping these folks get back to the deserved position that marketing should have in modern businesses.
Hey, I hope you're enjoying the podcast. Would you agree that most marketers don't know if their campaigns are working or not? That's why I created the Experimental newsletter. It helps you cut wasted spend, optimize your marketing budget, and defend any of your decisions in a boardroom. Start with the free version or go deeper with premium insights reserved for paid subscribers. Scan the QR code or click the link in the description to join now. Let's get back to the episode. I absolutely agree. And I also kudos on going into what is a challenging space with a lot of vendors, a lot of competition. And still, I think you've been able to find a unique angle in this, approach to how do I position this language towards CFOs and CEOs is actually quite refreshing, if you will. Is that something you face as a marketing leader? Was this something that this anxiety, is that something you would experience as well?
To some degree, but not. I was fortunate that when I was a marketing leader, I was working for a CEO who got it. And I was working with a CFO who was very practical and understood the limits of what's possible and what's not possible. So I didn't personally feel it, but I will say that there were times when I would notice the dysfunction within my teams. And what that means is there's a team that's called the brand marketing team. They're doing podcasts and they're doing influencer. They're trying to do things that aren't direct response. And then you have the other team, which is like, we're doing Apple search ads and we're doing Google search ads and we're doing Meta. Very, very sort of bottom of the funnel. And not always, but like you get my point. There was dysfunction between those two teams. Why are we doing this? And why are we doing that? And even the board level, when I had to represent it, I had to be really thoughtful about how are we going to talk about the measurement of some of this because it wasn't easy or obvious. This is all happening like iOS 14.5, 2020, 2021. It's all a mess. And so, I had support from the CEO and the CFO. Did I personally feel 100% confident in everything that we were doing? No, I didn't. And so I was like, yeah, this needs to get fixed. And intuitively, I knew there have to be better ways of measuring it. But back then, I hadn't personally discovered those. And so there was this like lack of confidence. Then when we finally discovered it, I'm like, oh my God, this is like obvious in hindsight that this is how we should be measuring marketing. So I feel a lot more confident. Sometimes I joke about this. I would love to go back and be a CMO somewhere because, oh my God, I know how to do this effectively,
Yeah, no, yeah, that's amazing. There's so many threads I want to pull. I want to revisit something in your earlier career when you did become a marketer, right? Like a lot of things you had mentioned were like the quantitative and the sort of science side, but there's obviously an art side. How did you bridge that gap, from an engineering to like, oh wow, marketing, there's a lot of art, there's a lot of creativity. Like what was sort of your journey there?
Yeah, the first was recognizing and acknowledging that I didn't know anything. So it was what I knew was very surface level based on growth hacking, conversion rate optimization, landing page optimization type of work that I had done as a growth PM or a, partner to a growth marketing team or what have you. And the very first thing I did was I bought 15 or 20 books. They're still in the library in our office. And these were recommendations from some of the best marketers that I knew, right? So right now I'm rereading Scientific Advertising, Claude Hopkins, I think that's the name of the author. But there's lots of great ones out there and just read the books. And, that was sort of step one. Step two was I actually went and took a whole bunch of online courses from some of the contemporary, folks who were leading marketing. One of them that was very influential to me was actually this course on copywriting from Dave Gerhardt. Okay, this is wild. He's a B2B marketer. He was very popular on LinkedIn. This is, 2018, 2019, something of that nature, something of that sort of timeline. And he had released a course sometime around then. I can't remember exactly when. And I took that course and it was literally him just with like 100-page slide deck, no design, and just went through everything that he had learned about copywriting. And I was like, opened my eyes to how to think about marketing in a very, very different way. So it was like a collection of these small little things, right? The books, the courses, and really just admiring what people are doing and, developing my own taste based on what other people are doing. And I came from a very like tech B2B SaaS PLG type of world, right? Dropbox, Adobe, Bill.com, and Voice2Go. And so that was my exposure. I saw Gong release their first Super Bowl ad. And I was like, wait, what? Right? And now my worlds are colliding between sort of tech marketing and sort of the more broad-based CPG marketing. And I just started to learn everything about sort of what's going on and how the box that we had been put in as tech and SaaS marketers could be completely blown up. And you could do really interesting things. And then I also noticed like B2C marketers, B2B marketers, it's all the same. Like there isn't that much different. Yes, there are differences in tactics and what have you, but at the end of the day, you're trying to tell stories to other human beings about why they should take a bet on you as a product, as a service provider. And that's it. That's what it boils down to, is storytelling. So that was my process or journey. And then just being very, humble that, hey, I have to relearn a lot of things because my upbringing and my education was in a very different sort of context.
I think humility and curiosity are a common theme that I hear in leaders. So it's great to hear you reinforce that. And also to reinforce the point of this B2B, B2C differentiation that really doesn't exist. You are now the, I think, third person in this podcast to share that. So that's very, very cool. I want to go back to like the problems you're solving at Paramark. Something that you had mentioned is like you were talking to these CMOs, you've had this continuous like pattern of like, hey, here's the same challenges we're seeing. Why are CMOs still struggling to be able to articulate towards CFOs and CEOs in a different way? Like what's the sort of thing that's the blocker there?
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a few things that are happening. And I've been thinking very deeply about this particular topic. CMO tenures are short. Some of it is self-inflicted, and some of it is unfair expectations from the rest of the C-suite. The self-inflicted part, let's talk about that. When new CMOs show up at the job, their bias is towards action and being able to put points on the board. And that starts a series of events that leads to a problematic situation where if you start taking action right off the bat, and I can get it, right? I get it. If I was a new CMO coming into a new role and the board and the CEO is like, hey, you need to grow 50% next year. And I'm like constantly starting to think about new ideas, new channels, new tactics, what have you. The problem is that if you don't have a good fundamental foundation of measurement, it becomes really hard to then go back and talk about the activities that I did they actually result in something or not? And so in the interest of velocity and speed, we end up losing the strategic high ground of putting the right foundation in place before you go take those actions. So that's one like self-inflicted why it happens. And it's hard, right? It's hard to go to a CEO and say in your first month, hey, I'm going to go fix measurement first. Like that is not what the CEO wants to hear. That is not what the board wants to hear. So it's a delicate stakeholder management and change management. And you have to get really good about that, which is parallel processing. And I think this is where experimentation comes in. You don't have to invest 6 months, 9 months, 12 months in changing the entire infrastructure. People don't realize that incrementality testing is something you can launch on week 1 of your job. And you can do it in DIY ways, you can do it in sophisticated ways, but if you understood the concept, it's not as heavy a lift and you don't have to go convince your CEO about some 6-figure investment that you have to make to get this going. Okay, so that's one piece. The second piece of unfair expectations, I think many CMOs find themselves in a situation where it's an uphill battle from day one. There's something fundamentally wrong about the business that's causing the growth to plateau or not be where the board wants it to be. And the pressure ends up on the marketer to say, hey, here are ways in which we can unlock growth. But the fundamental issues that are blocking that growth have not been resolved. Is it pricing? Is it packaging? Is it distribution channels, right? Sales channels? Is it just the cogs and the margin of the product that limits the ability for you to invest in CAC? And if your competitors are better at it than you are, then you naturally just have, your hands are tied behind your back. So there's a lot of things that are not in a modern marketer's control. And this makes me sad because they should be: pricing, packaging, margin. These are all essential things for marketers to understand, but they're given a more narrow way of looking at their job, which is much more just focused on promotional activities and the comms activities, which is just unfair. It's like marketers need to do a better job of the change management, the expectation management about measurement, and then going at it and running a whole bunch of, new creative campaigns and experiments. CEOs and CFOs need to do a better job of making sure that they're setting the marketer up for success and not expecting unrealistic things. So that's, I think, where the dysfunction comes from.
I love that. There's so much to unpack, but kind of like you mentioned at the beginning of the episode, the name of the podcast is Experimental, and you brought up experimentation. Let's dive into how do you set up a culture of experimentation? What are you seeing as best practices? Let's start there.
Yeah. It's interesting. I was talking to a company. We're onboarding them right now, and they've been doing experimentation for the last 6 months. They've been doing a whole series of incrementality tests with another, platform. And I asked them in this call, there was a whole bunch of reasons why they're talking to us, but I asked them in this call, hey, you're going into Q4, you're probably thinking about 2026 planning and budgeting. If you were to survey your C-suite and ask them about their confidence level in the decisions that you're going to make for 2026 planning, is it low, medium, high? They were like, yeah, it's probably low to medium. And that told me something, which is, yes, they've been doing experimentation, but it's not leading to higher confidence, which is really interesting to me. So something about that is broken. Something is not working, where if you had a true culture of experimentation, you should be very confident going into those types of conversations. So I want to start with how do you, not just the tactical pieces, but how do you actually develop a high confidence culture? And I think it starts with 3 things. One is being very, very, very clear about the metrics that you're optimizing and what is in your control versus what is not in your control. And this is where I think finance and executive teams need to get a lot more educated, that just because you want to move a metric doesn't mean that you have control over that metric. So there's a recognition of that. In B2B, I'll give you an example of this. It's the volume of opportunities or leads, and there is the value of the opportunities and leads. You can have $1 million deal fall into your lap through the same strategies where you have thousands of $10,000 deals fall into your lap. And if you measure and run experiments based on the value, you might get a very different answer from the volume. And the marketers may not be able to control the value metric. If it's a large PLG, broad-based, right? It's a Notion, it's a Dropbox, it's a take any sort of example like that. You just had $1 million deal fall in your lap. That has nothing to do with, and I can give a counterpoint. It's no, it has to do with your marketing, but now you're appealing to the enterprise. No, your whole product, your sign-up motion is based on freemium and PLG. You're going to always appeal to a very broad audience. So the metric really, really matters, and clarity on that at the top level matters a lot, because you just end up in we want to do self-serve signups. We also want to do enterprise. We also want to do blah and blah. It's you take the same exact thing on the B2C side. We want to do direct to consumer. We want to do Amazon. We want to do retail. We want to do new sales. We want to do repeat sales. You got to have a strategy about what you're picking and what you're going after. So that's a very big part of the brokenness in, cultures when it comes to experimentation. The second piece is freedom to fail. And it's very easy to say this, but I think most people don't know that 80% of tests fail. And let that sink in. It's possible that your first 4 tests out of the 5 have no incrementality, are complete duds.
Not even
You could
possible,
give up
but very likely too.
very likely too, right?
Yeah,
So you could give up at that point and be like, I don't know what we're doing as a team. I don't know what we're doing as marketing. 4 tests have failed. And if you don't, again, understand that failure is the only option until you get to success, and it's not about a point in time result of a test, it's about the learning that you're getting from it and the rinse and repeat and the iteration. That's another big issue. People will say, yeah, let's experiment, let's test it, but then they're not okay with what happens if you fail. So you can't have it both ways. Okay, then I think the third thing that I would say is creative and strategy. And why am I saying this? You can A/B test everything to death. You can run a gazillion incrementality tests. If you don't have good creative, I'm sorry, you're not going to win. And so not investing in the right creative talent, the right creative process, the right creative strategy, all of those things are going to give you a significant bang on your buck. And that takes, again, a leadership team that cares about creative, that cares about taste, that cares about storytelling. And if you're just going to be, no, just show me the list of experiments that we're launching and show me the ICAC and show me the lift, all of that is great. You must do that. But you can't forget about what is the creative we're putting in. That's another part of the culture. So I would stop at those 3. There's many more things that we could talk about, but I think those 3 things are probably top of mind for me.
Yeah, and just on the creative, right? You can read a lot about this new idea of, hey, AI will help you create 1,000 different versions. You just sort of pump them into Meta and let it pick. But it sounds like you're saying, hey, you actually need a strategy first, right? So how do you balance this sort of strategy versus experimentation with creative?
Yeah, it's a very good point. So there's the tactical execution of the creative, and then there's the strategy of the creative. The tactical execution is getting easier and easier with the amazing generative AI tools that we have, right? Nano Banana is like the favorite thing right now, right? Amazing. VO3 is amazing. By the way, I think Google is just like doing a really killer job of all of the large, model companies, which was pretty amazing to see. Okay. But when I talk about strategy, it's actually quite simple. Most companies have not done this, have not written down the strategic narrative behind your business. And, you go ask any CMO, like, hey, do you have a document that summarizes the strategic narrative of this business? And they're like, huh? Like, they're like, what are you talking about? It's like, there's a 3-year-old strategy doc that the corporate strategy team wrote, or there's a separate product strategy doc that the product team wrote. There's a separate sales strategy doc the sales team wrote. Nobody has really encapsulated the end-to-end, why do you exist, right? What is the reason for your existence? Who is your audience? What are the jobs to be done for that audience? How do you particularly do those jobs? When should they think about you? The whole idea of category entry points. What are the lessons you've learned over the course of the entire company about the psychological behaviors that you're able to change in people? If you write all of these things down in a structured fashion, that is your source for strategy. And, one of the things that I'm doing now a lot is we've written this down for Paramark. And I have a custom GPT that I'm building right now. Right now, it's just a project in ChatGPT where I've got all these source documents. I've got some great sort of marketing material that we've created. And then I use that to come up with, I'll just feed in a sales call transcript and say, hey, can you come up with some interesting ad concepts based on this transcript and everything that you know about our strategy? And it'll do a pretty good job. Look at the objections and like, hey, maybe you can just, use this objection as the hook for the next sort of LinkedIn static that you create. So that's what I mean by the strategy piece. And then, yes, the iteration on execution has become easier, but if you just keep focusing on the iteration and keep making tweaks when you're not thinking about the strategy, I think you're doing a disservice to your business. And the strategy piece hasn't gotten easier. It just requires you to get completely immersed in your business. And that's hard.
Absolutely. And I really resonate with this because just even with my own LinkedIn content, I've changed like my ICP and my strategy like 4 different times over the past 4 years. And you always like see a dip and you always feel like you're at bottom until you're like, you know what, I'm going to commit to this strategy. It's well researched. It's based on what people say they want, and you start to see it move. And it's slow and it's cumulative, but it's totally valid, right? Like the strategy is such a bigger piece of the puzzle than most people think. One thing I wanted to dig into deeper was like you had mentioned this, CMO who doesn't have a lot of confidence. Where do you feel like building and planning roadmaps? Like how do roadmaps fit into this ability to
Mm.
bring confidence? Like what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's such a good question. If you were to survey CMOs about, I give you this example. Like if you were to go and ask your CPO, right, your chief product officer, hey, what's our roadmap for H1 of 2026? They'll probably have something, right? Go ask a CMO this question. And here's what's going to happen. They're going to tell you, hey, give me a couple of weeks. They're going to go to all their VPs and ask them like, hey, what's the latest thinking on H1? And each VP is going to come up with, or each director is going to come up with their own one-page slide or memo. The CMO is going to take all of that, put it together, and then present that as like, this is our roadmap. Why is this happening? This is happening because this idea of thinking in roadmaps is not common in marketing. It's a very sort of product way of thinking. And maybe it existed in the 80s, 90s. I actually don't know, right? Because we didn't do marketing back. I didn't do marketing back then. But there isn't a system of record of, forget about future looking. There's not even a system of record for the past of, hey, over the last 3 years, here are the list of strategies, campaigns, experiments that we tried. And here's what happened with each one. It just doesn't exist. And one of the things that I get excited about is I think in the next 5 years, you're going to see a company emerge that becomes that system of record for marketers. And, with full disclosure, we're putting our hat in the ring. That's what we want to actually become. Measurement is a stepping stone towards that sort of eventual goal, where when you ask a CMO, hey, what are we doing for the H1 of 2026? You just pull up Paramark and it shows you all of the bets that the marketing team is making, aligned with the content pillars and the strategies, the channel strategy, and you just hit publish for the rest of the company to see. Guess what? All of it tied back to a measurement plan that is sensible and reasonable. So I think that will happen, but it just doesn't exist right now. It's all Notion docs and Slack and, one-off sort of artifacts.
What a beautiful vision. And I can obviously imagine so many people when they hear this, like buy into this notion that you're talking about. So I'm excited for it to show up when it does. One thing that I wanted to start to ask you about is you've had an incredible career, so many cool companies. I'd love to hear some really fun stories that you've got. Maybe one from Dropbox that you can.
Yeah, this is a good one. I was at Dropbox between 2013 and 2016. And I just come out of a startup that I was a co-founder in, but we parted ways and it was traumatic for me and what have you. So I end up at Dropbox. I'm like, hey, this is amazing. They were growing really fast, amazing company. Interestingly, they were very okay with taking certain types of risks. And so one of the risks that they took is like, hey, this person who's in the biz ops team, this is me, they gave me access to push to production because they couldn't actually dedicate engineering team members to that effort. And so they're like, you know how to code. I'm like, yeah, I know how to code. And so we're just going to give you access. I'm like, kudos to you for trusting me with that. The I think one of the first few experiments that we launched was literally just changing the call to action on the trial page for a new product called Dropbox to Business. Back then it was like a new thing. And it used to say something like start free trial. And we changed it to try it free. And I kid you not, Sundar, that was a 17% increase in the number of trial starts just off of that 3-letter change. Now, I got super excited about it. I'm like, holy shit, this is amazing. Look how much impact we've had. I looked back at that number 30 days later when the trial ends. It was a 30-day trial. And the actual lift was closer to like 4 or 5%, right? Not a 17%. And still pretty amazing. But that was my first actual lesson in that, topic we're talking about, which is be really clear about the metrics that you are moving and that you can move and that is in your control. And so that was a fun story. And listen, we did lots of great experimentation at Dropbox throughout sort of the Dropbox business journey. And I think now it's probably sort of the bigger chunk of revenue that the business generates. But that was a fun one. Happy to go into more if you want me to.
Yeah, let's talk about one that didn't work out well. Anything for maybe,
Have
yeah.
plenty. Oh my God.
Of course.
Okay, this is a
80%,
really fun one.
80% probably didn't work.
This is a really fun one. So I'll talk about an example. I was at this company called Invoice to Go. This was a mobile invoicing app. Imagine you're, freelancer, like an interior designer or an architect, or your plumber or your landscaper using this invoicing app to send out invoices. And this is 2021. I'd been there for about a year. And the vision for the business, for the product was changing in a pretty big way. Had hundreds of thousands of customers, tens of millions of dollars in revenue. And what we noticed was customers wanted more than invoicing. They wanted to, have payments. They wanted to have proposals. They wanted to have the ability to track time. There were all of these things that were going way beyond invoicing. And one of the things that I realized, and I talked to the leadership, the CEO, the board about, I think we need to change the name of the product. Because imagine if Uber was called Taxis to Go, right? It's like there was no way to do brand extension off of the brand and the identity that we had created. And it was a very, very risky thing because, hey, you have hundreds of thousands of users, tens of millions of dollars of revenue. Okay, but here's the fun story. So everyone gets behind it. We're like, yes, we're going to change the name of the company. Let's go. We went on an extensive process to find the name of that we wanted. And I can reveal this now. It's not a big deal. We landed on Get-Go. That was the name that we got excited about. We're with you from the get-go in helping you grow your business. We go through a trademarking process, right? The whole thing, like this is the first time I'm doing it. We run the preliminary checks. Everything comes out like it'll be fine. There's nobody in this category. 1 week before the deadline, the whole rebrand is ready to ship. We get an objection from this large gas chain that has a card that's branded Get-Go card or something of that nature, right? And I'm like, wait, what? Why do they think this is competitive? Like this is a completely different category. And then we realized because they have a private label card with the name Get-Go, and we were talking about, banking and cards and payments, there was a potentially competitive issue. And we had to pull the plug on the whole rebrand 1 week before the rebrand. And I had to get on with a 100-person team on a Zoom call and be like, hey guys, this is on me. I fucked up. This is not happening. And the team pulled it together. They're like, everything was committed in code. We just took everything out, massive 1 week effort because we had to launch for some other reasons. So we did the launch. We sort of still launched with the new positioning and messaging and the products that we're announcing and what have you, but we still had to stick with Invoice to Go. So that was not really, an experiment, but as a marketing leader, a huge lesson on the risk that you can take and cannot take. And, it was very humbling. Learned a lot about trademarks. It was fun, but that was a big L.
Yeah. I think given a lot of these rebrands that have come through like Jaguar or Cracker Barrel, it's funny to hear the flip side of the ones that don't get out, but still feel like a big L, like you said. I want to go a bit more into a lot of the stories that I hear are about larger companies, but obviously you're a founder, you're a startup, super scrappy, super different. Tell me a little bit about how you felt, when you felt like you found product market fit or that there was something here, maybe your first customer story. Let's go a little bit deeper into that. I would love to hear more about that.
Yeah, it's a good question. We took a different strategy from maybe most startups where we didn't write a single line of code until we got our first check. And some people will call that, oh, so you were selling vaporware. No, we wanted to be very sure that what we were building is actually going to add value and add value in a significant way. And so that's the first story, right? Got our first check. It was just $500 or something. But that was all right, somebody's willing to pay us money and transfer us money before we go build the thing we want to build. And coincidentally, the first 5 things that we did, they were all, mostly paid, but they were nominal sums of money. Then we got our first enterprise contract with Square. That was our first customer. And December of 2023, and I think we started working with them in Jan of 2024. And that was just like a shock to us. We were like, wait, how did this happen? And, what we realized in that process was because we had taken a very sort of thoughtful approach on what it is that we're building and what value it adds, the conversations never felt like we were trying to convince somebody. It was always like, there's a very clear problem that's already been articulated and found, and we just have a great offer to be able to solve that problem. And that was, I think in our very first contract, we were like, okay, we think we've de-risked. When we think about building startups, there's product risk and market risk.
Mm-hmm.
And we've de-risked the market risk part of it, which is like, we think that if Square with a giant data science team is still buying Paramark services, there's probably many more companies like that. So that felt very de-risked from the very beginning. And then it was a question of product risk of like, hey, can we actually build this and deliver this at a high quality? And frankly, I would say we're still on that journey. And the reason I say that is, yes, we know we can do it. That's not the risk. The risk is in, can you do it at the appropriate cost that makes this a venture scale business? That is the piece that we are automating and scaling and making it more self-serve, making it more dynamic. You probably can appreciate what I mean by all of those things. People log into Paramark today and see, reports and dashboards and experiment results and experiment designs. How do you make that X more self-serve, 10X more dynamic, and built in a marketer's language rather than a data scientist's language? And that requires not just great product, but also great design. Because if you spend time with marketers, right, like if you start talking about diminishing returns and saturation curves and lag effects, you can, and the top 1% of marketers are probably going to be very familiar with those terms, but 90% are not. And so how do you explain credibility intervals and, confidence levels in a way that doesn't lead to analysis paralysis and also the feeling of a black box? And that is the stuff where, even though we're at millions of revenue and 40 customers plus, I wouldn't call it like the job is done. No, the job isn't done. We have to continue to push the boundary on how do you make this really, really easy for a marketer.
Yeah, still so early, still, $1 trillion market, likely in many, many billion. So very early. But even on Square, for example, I don't know if you can share, but like, how did they hear about you? Who was the one that reached out? Like, was it the data science team? Was it the marketing team, the CFO? Like who came to you?
That was a fun one. Yeah, that was a fun one. I knew one of the finance leaders at Square who had left Square. And I just reached out to him for feedback because they were in our ICP. And I get on a call. He gives me a bunch of feedback. He's like, hey, by the way, you should talk to the data team at Square. We always struggled with this. And I'm like, okay, great. Make the intro. So it was a very weak connection. This is like, I hadn't spoken to this individual for 10 years. So I speak to them. They make the connection. The head of go-to-market data at Square is like, you don't even have a website. Like, come talk to me when you're more mature. They basically like gave up, and we're like, fair point. It's Square. 3 months later, they just reached back out and said, hey, this is now a priority for us. We need to make an investment in this place, in this domain. Can we chat more? And so that then became, okay, how do you do incrementality testing? We could do it, in-house. Why shouldn't we do it in-house? And it became a question of, we're bringing a certain amount of expertise. We've looked at this stuff inside out, and it's going to be at a cost that is going to be prohibitive for you to compete with if you're trying to hire dedicated resources in-house. So it became a very easy decision for them to make that, this is 2023, 2024, budgets were tight and headcount was tight. I don't think that has changed. In fact, I would argue it's continued to get tighter. And so it was a pretty easy decision for them to make at that point. They didn't just have the right internal, I would say, depth of experience to be able to do it confidently. And there's also an element of, we need a little bit of an objective point of view rather than, sometimes you can be biased when you're working internally. Not always, but there's always a sense of, are we being biased about sort of how we're viewing the data? Not always, like I said, but it can be. So there was a bunch of factors that played into that story.
That's the last one you said was very interesting because it's something I've been seeing a lot, which is everyone says, "Oh, McKinsey is dead," his consulting firms are dead, without realizing that the value these firms add are being this objective outside perspective. But that, like you said, internally, of course, it's always going to feel like the CMO is presenting the best case scenario, best version of a numbers. But now if you get an external party, it's a little bit different, a little unbiased, if you will.
I'll give you another example on that
Yeah.
note. Just like last week, we had a test result on AppLovin for an e-commerce brand. And the test result basically says, hey, we're not seeing any evidence of incrementality here. If there is, it's not high enough to, cut across the noise level that we're seeing in your data. And the reaction from our point of contact was like, I just don't believe it. This cannot be. How could this be true? I'm looking at the AppLovin dashboard. I'm looking at all the benchmarks that, the industry has published. This cannot be true. And that is the thing that's really hard, is there's a certain perception. And listen, that person might be right. And this is where marketing science gets really nuanced, right? We're not seeing evidence of lift in the way that we've done the analysis. We've looked at it 5 different ways with 5 different synthetic controls and what have you. It's just not passing the smell test of, is it statistically powerful enough for us to say that there is lift? You might be right that there is some lift. It's just not observable in the data. So what can we do about it? Is there something we can do about it? And that conversation of that internal bias, which is very natural, and a third-party objective, here's what we're seeing when you cut the data in all these different ways. That's a big reason why people should still, in certain domains, outsource some of this work.
Yeah. Wow. Like you said, like there's always, especially when you see a result that is not in your favor, I feel like the natural reaction is, nope, can't be right. But like you said, 80% of the time it's probably right. If you're a marketer or CMO, CEO, CFO, and you're thinking about, hey, we have these problems, Pranav is talking about a lot of things that we want to fix. How do you go about thinking through which vendor do I pick? I mean, there are literally, I feel like thousands of MMM and incrementality vendors. What do you ask? What do you look for?
Oh, this is such a good one. So I think I'm actually going to write a whole guide on this, and we're actually hosting a session this week with a bunch of CMOs about exactly that topic. So it's very timely. There's, I think, maybe to keep it simple, 3 things that I think about. One is, this is now table stakes, MMM plus incrementality testing. I don't think you should be in a position where you're buying point solutions. And there's a reason for it. These 2 things are not, there's some vendors who will say MMM is amazing. There'll be some vendors who say incrementality testing is amazing. The reality is both of those solutions have very clear downsides and cons. And so when you join them and you look at them together, there is a methodology and a framework that makes a lot of sense. So that's number 1 in the criteria.
And just really quickly on that, a point solution is just that they do either only MMM or only incrementality?
Correct.
Okay.
And
Yep.
so I personally wouldn't favor solutions that do just one or the other. I would recommend buying a solution that does both. And you might start with just testing or just MMM, but knowing that you can add on the other piece when the time is right for your business, that's very helpful. And also being able to just, from a philosophical standpoint, not being ideologically bound to testing is the gold standard, or MMMs are, longer term. They give you a broader view of things. These are half truths, because you can't test every channel, and MMMs are great, but they're correlational. No matter how much causal I put in front of them, doesn't make them causal. And it's very, very hard to build causal MMMs. We can talk about that someday. So that's the first sort of criteria. Make sure that the team, the vendor that you pick, understands and is transparent about the limitations of both and how they leverage both to do a good job for you. The second piece that I would talk about a lot is there's a level of human judgment that is still very much needed and involved. There are lots of connect everything and we'll throw up a dashboard for you in 1 week. I would be very, very skeptical of those types of tools. And the reason I say that is every business is unique and every metric is unique. Every buyer journey is unique. And you need a certain amount of human judgment and experience on top of the data science and the machine learning and the dashboards to make sure you're making the right decisions. So really pay attention to the support. And I don't mean that like, here's the support agent and here's the account manager. I mean, the people who are on the front lines, do they really understand your business? And can they span across both marketing and data science to help you make the decision of what's the next best action? So that piece is very, I think, important and critical. The third, is there a third criteria that I should think of in terms of selecting vendors? I mean, honestly, I think the piece that is really interesting to us right now is the scalability of what you're doing and the fit with the vendor. And so let me explain what I mean. If you are running $1 billion of ads a year and is mature, Fortune 500 type of budgets, there's a very different type of testing and modeling versus you're doing 20 million or 50 million in ads and you're growing 60, 70% a year. Very different frameworks. And I'll give you a very concrete example. If you're doing $1 billion in ads, you're probably going to do a lot of holdouts. And you can, because you have sufficient data to do holdouts. If you're only doing 10, 20, 30, 40 million in ads, and most of that's concentrated on Meta and YouTube, you can't do a search holdout because your search spend is so tiny that, and this, most people don't get this, right? So when you do a holdout, you're just going to get inconclusive answers. So your focus should be much more on pulse up testing and, trying to go for growth because that's the stage of your business. When you're $2 billion in ads, you're going a little bit more for efficiency. You know that you have to spend that much for your competitive dynamic, and the holdouts are just keeping you honest on you're not wasting any dollar. So be really sure about sort of as a brand, which bucket do you exist in, and really make sure that you align with how the vendor thinks about your business. And we see this mistake all the time where people are doing these completely useless holdouts when they just don't have the data for it and not thinking enough about the pulse ups and the new channels and the new creatives. And that's where the focus should be for most emerging growth brands.
I love that. It's so clear that you truly deeply understand this market. I've got one more question for you, which is what in this realm of marketing science, like what keeps you up at night?
I say this to our product team and engineering team all the time. That's if we could wave a magic wand and remove all decimals in our reports and dashboards and remove every, I never want to share 17% incrementality. I want to share it's probably between 13 and 19. So what keeps me up at night is somebody misunderstanding what these dashboards and reports are saying and making a wrong decision based on just looking at the data and not being able to understand sort of how to interpret that data. That keeps me up at night because I know that our audience is smart, but at the same time, they're not trained statisticians. And so that's what keeps me up at night is when I say it keeps me up at night, it's like, how do we come up with new ideas to make that easier, simpler? Because at the end of the day, you still have to convert that into a financial forecast that you can share with the CFO. So yes, there's probabilities and uncertainty, and yes, you need to represent it in a very financial way. So that part is really, really hard, Sundar, from a product design perspective, which we are both excited about, but also realize that if you don't do a good job, it leads to a false precision, which is very, very bad.
Yeah, it's really well said. And even what a confidence interval is actually quite misunderstood by a lot of people. Last question. You've now seen so much across so many companies in your own experience. Like, what is your favorite marketing metric?
Ooh, favorite marketing metric. These days, the one that is top of mind, and this is doing the rounds on social as well, is how many new people are you reaching with your advertising? It's very simple, right?
Cost for incremental reach or something. No, like
CPMR. CPMR is the acronym. And I think it's basically saying the cost per new 1,000 people reached, which I think is a good way to think about. Again, this is a growth mentality, right? if I need to grow, I need to reach new people. And how effectively am I reaching those new people? And that's a good sort of leading indicator of everything that you're putting in your creative and the ad platforms, is it getting you to new audiences or not? Because that's the definition of incrementality, right? If you don't have that, very, very unlikely that you're getting more incremental revenue from the people that you already have been reaching for the last 2 years.
I love that. If anything, I hope it just eliminates inefficient retargeting and remarketing. So at least it can do that. I wanted to thank you so much. It's really been great to get into the mind of somebody that has clearly understands it and is building a startup from it, but also have a wealth of experience. So like I had a fantastic time with you on here, and I just wanted to thank you for your time.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. I diligently follow all your guests and learn from them. So super excited about the journey that you're going on. And hopefully you will get to that Lenny level of subscription. So rooting for you.
I hope so too. Thank you, Pranav. And yes, we should definitely do this again because this has been fantastic.
Thanks for tuning into Experimental. If today's insights sparked new ideas or made you feel like a smarter marketer, consider leaving a review on your preferred podcast platform. It really helps support the show. For more in-depth discussions and resources, visit experimental.beehive.com. Until next time, be curious and stay experimental.